Islam, Scientific Ideology, and Evolution. Introduction. In the society today, evolution has become a fact that is worshipped at all levels. Since Darwin proposed his theory, the concept of evolution has become so institutionalized that it is regarded as an indisputable fact that is above questioning, doubt, or criticism. Those who even suggest an alternative are either censored or labeled as freaks who go against the tide of everything advanced, modern, and civilized. Even the Church, regarded by many as the last stand against evolution, has given to defeat and has accepted evolution as a fact. It is clear that the theory of evolution contradicts Islam clearly. Evolution claims that life emerged from material and evolved into its different forms through random mutation and selective environmental pressures, while Islam states that life originated from Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not randomness or natural selection, created all the diversity of the living world. Yet the theory of evolution, and its foundation of scientific ideology is so pervasive that even Muslims have become institutionalized with them. Many Muslims are at a loss when it comes to confronting the theory of evolution, and this lack of understanding may result in Muslims giving way to the ideas and thoughts of the Kufr culture, which may ultimately result in Muslims trying to reconcile between those Kufr ideas and Islam. As a result, the Muslims have been bombarded and cultured with ideas such as evolution and scientific ideology to such an extent that many Muslims would be led to believe that Islam is a scientific way of life or that evolution does not contradict Islam. Today, the scientific thinking represents the prevailing thought of the West, which it is trying to propagate to the world, and the West takes a great amount of pride in this scientific thought. Furthermore, the theory of evolution is a concept, perhaps the most pervasive concept, that has emerged as a byproduct of this method of thinking. This concept has become so dear and respected in the eyes of the people that even the slightest challenge to either the scientific thinking or to the theory of evolution will strike at the very emotions of the people. The Muslims must understand every arm of Kufr if they are to be able to address the people and present Islam to them in an effective way. When Muhammad carried the Dawah, he addressed the prevailing thoughts and ideas of the people, he attacked their method of thinking and establishing their ideas, and he presented Islam to them in an effective manner. The Muslims are obliged to carry the Dawah in the same manner, and not understanding the thoughts and ideas of the Kuffar makes carrying the Dawah impossible. The prevailing thought among the West is that the scientific method can be used at the ideological level in order to address the human being and to present solutions to human problems and to the problems of human societies. Also, the West has pushed for the idea that the scientific method or thought can be used to arrive at a doctrine of belief and prove the existence of what was before and after the life, as well as to prove the origins of man, life, and the universe. As a result, the theory of evolution has emerged as a byproduct of this thinking in order to provide a doctrine of belief, or an aqidah, based on scientific thought. Because the scientific thought and method are used by the kuffar to arrive at the doctrine of belief and to address human beings and human problems at the level of the ideology, and the theory of evolution represents this view of scientific thought. Thus, it becomes imperative for the Muslims to understand what is the scientific thought and method, what are the limits of science, and what is the basis of the theory of evolution in order to put things in their proper perspective and address the theory of evolution in the proper perspective. Building belief. Because the scientific thought is believed by many to be a basis for thought and building belief, and the theory of evolution is a result of this thinking, then it is important to discuss the criterion for establishing belief and arriving at the doctrine of belief, or the aqidah. Human beings perceive their surroundings directly and, through their perceptions, they acquire information about their surroundings. By linking this information with previous information they have through use of the mind, human beings arrive at certain facts and conclusions, which provides the basis for thoughts, concepts and ideas about life and the universe. This process, called the intellectual or rational process, is what distinguishes human beings from all other creations, and it is the only way in which thoughts and ideas are arrived at, and these thoughts and ideas form the basis of belief. For a belief or thought to be definite and correct, it must be established upon definite facts. In the absence of definite facts, one can only speculate or make assumptions, which leads to doubt because speculation and assumptions cannot be proven as correct. Only through the rational or intellectual approach, which depends upon the process of thinking to arrive at definite facts, can the correct belief or thoughts be established. The question that comes is, what sources provide information which human beings, through the rational approach, can arrive at definite facts? The only sources of information are directly through sensory perception of the surroundings. Information from a credible source for things that are beyond the senses and the comprehension of the human mind. Realities that lay beyond the realm of sensory perception and comprehension cannot be proven conclusively based on observation through the senses because they are beyond the realm of perception. Such things include past events, the origin of life in the universe, what was before life in the universe, and what will come after life in the universe. Information for such things can only come from a credible source, and the validity of the information will depend upon whether the source of the information, whether it is the Bible or the Quran, can prove itself to be a credible source. From these two sources, definite facts are derived, and from these facts, thoughts and ideas are arrived at, which form the building blocks of belief and the foundation of the ideology. The limits of science. Based upon the process of building belief, it is evident that science has its limits. The scientific method is a specific method in research used to find the reality of something by subjecting the thing to experimental conditions and environments other than its original conditions, and then comparing the original and the imposed conditions in order to deduce facts. Through this process, a tangible reality is deduced. This process can only be employed in research on the tangible things that can be subjected to experimental conditions. Furthermore, the result that is obtained by the scientific method is not absolute, but indefinite and subject to error or the possibility of error. The possibility of error in the scientific method is one of its principles as laid down in scientific research. These facts show plainly that science cannot be used to build belief or thoughts and concepts about man, life and the universe, nor can science be used to address human problems and needs because such things cannot be subjected to experimental conditions. One cannot put human problems, human societies, and the issues that human beings face and subjugate them to laboratory or experimental conditions and derive conclusions or solutions to such realities based on the scientific method. Similarly, one cannot observe things beyond perception or beyond the comprehension of the human mind, such as what existed before life in the universe, what will come after life in the universe, or the origins of man, life, and the universe, and subjugate these things to the scientific method because the scientific method only deals with tangible objects that can be subjected to scientific experimentation. Furthermore, the possibility of error is inherent in the scientific method. A fundamental precept of the conclusions that are deduced through the scientific method is that they are subject to error or to the possibility of error, and this fact eliminates the possibility of science to be used as a basis for building defined facts about man, life and the universe. Also, the scientific method is an offshoot of the rational method and is not a basis of thought. The rational method deals with things that are within the realm of sensory perception and comprehension by the human mind and senses, while the scientific method is restricted to those things among the perceivable and comprehensible that can be subjected to experimental conditions. Therefore, the scientific method cannot be made as a basis of though because it is not an origin that could be built upon, but a branch of an origin. There are many things that lay within the comprehension of the human mind and the perception of the human senses, such as human problems, the issues that human beings face, the fields of language, fiqh, jurisprudence, and linguistics, and the political movements of nations and societies, that are sources of knowledge and facts but cannot be subjected to experimental conditions and the scientific thought. Treating the scientific method as an origin would exclude a great deal of information and sources of facts from research, and would lead to the absence of a large number of branches of knowledge which contain facts, even though they definitely exist and are felt through the senses and reality. A person can expose water to extreme heat or cold and observe that it freezes at a particular temperature and boils at another temperature using measuring devices, but the same person cannot use such a procedure for taking an angel or a piece of hellfire and deriving certain conclusions through observations. Similarly, a person can analyze a distant star by using instruments that can measure its energy output, but there is no instrument that can detect the creator and measure the creator's dimensions and composition. Similarly, a person can study enzymatic reactions in a cell or observe through a microscope the physical features of cell tissue cultures, but he cannot do the same with the economic and social problems of human beings and deduce facts based on scientific experimentation. The correct method of discussing ideas is not through the scientific thinking because scientific thought is restricted in studying materials and laws of the universe and understanding the processes and systems that organize and govern the universe and its components. If science extends beyond its limitations to attempt to answer questions that are beyond its scope, then the end result will completely contradict science. Those who observe the universe expanding and wish to propose a scientific explanation for the origin of the universe are forced to make a silly assumption that everything started with a Big Bang, without any means of testing such a phenomenon or observing it to know with certainty whether it actually happened. Furthermore, the attempt to bring scientific thinking to the level of the ideology and to use it as a basis for solving human problems, what is called scientific ideology, as the communists attempted, would result in an ideology incapable of providing any correct foundation of belief that agrees with the human nature and would lead to a system devoid of addressing the human needs, resulting in countless suffering and oppression as a result of treating human beings and human problems and issues as subjects of laboratory experimentation. The correct method arriving at a belief as a foundation for the ideology is through the intellectual method, which relies upon the thinking process to arrive at definite, conclusive facts. Science cannot be used to build belief or as a basis or thought, nor can it be used as an ideology capable of addressing human problems and human needs, because such things, though they are within the realm of sensory perception, cannot be subjected to the scientific method or experimentation. Because the theory of evolution is an attempt to build belief based on the scientific method, which science cannot do, then it is invalid from this perspective. However, because of the pervasiveness of evolution, this fact is not enough for many, and therefore, a more in-depth study of evolution becomes necessary. Evolution defined. The modern theory of evolution is believed by many to have had its origins in Charles Darwin, but the concept of dialectic evolution existed even before Darwin. Many intellectuals and scientists abandon the idea of creationism, more as a negative reaction to the Church during the Middle Ages in Europe than out of sincere conviction, and the idea that life emerged into its great diversity as a result of some kind of evolutionary process was adopted. It was Darwin who was the first to propose an explanation of a mechanism by which such a process was supposed to take place. Through both observation as well as through scientific experimentation, one observes the great diversity that exists throughout the living world. At the same time, there exist many similarities that exist between the different shades of life, and these scientifically deduced similarities form the basis of the idea among modern-day scientists that life evolved from one another through an evolutionary process, and that the different variants of life are related to one another through an evolutionary tree. Based upon this evolutionary tree, the scientists correlate the similarities that exist between the living organisms to an evolutionary sequence. Greater similarities between two forms of life would imply a recent evolutionary relationship, whereas a lesser degree of similarity would imply a more distant relationship. However, the central idea remains the same: all life evolved from one another, and the diversity of the living world had its origins from the process of gradual evolution. The central concept of the modern theory of evolution is the term natural selection, which Darwin coined as a process by which, through selective pressures imposed by the environment, certain species who are best adapted to live in the environment are selected for by a sorting process of elimination of the weak and continuation of the strong. In summary, the modern theory of evolution is based upon three principles fundamental to it. Principle of variation. Among individuals within any population, there exists variation in all aspects. Principle of heredity. Offspring resemble their parents more than they resemble unrelated individuals. Principle of selection. Some forms are more successful at surviving and reproducing than other forms in a given environment, and these forms are selected for and continue to reproduce, conferring their traits to their offspring. This concept is also termed as survival of the fittest, in which those that are more fit are selected for and continue to reproduce, whereas those that are less fit are gradually eliminated. According to this theory, new environmental selection pressures will emerge throughout time, and those organisms that carry the more successful adaptations are selected for and the less successful ones are weeded out along with their traits and characteristics. The new adaptations result from random changes, or mutations, in the genome of the living organism, which confers new physiological, behavioral, and other features. Upon these concepts of random mutation and natural selection rests the theory of evolution. The fallacy of evolution. In spite of its glamour, the theory of evolution cannot be proven definitely because it is based on information of events that cannot be reached either scientifically or rationally. The scientists observe the similarities between organisms, and the question then comes, how did life emerge with its tremendous diversity and yet retain so many similarities between the different shades of life? To answer such a question, one needs to either subject the origins of life in the universe, or what was before the life in the universe, to experimental conditions, or the observer must have existed at the time of the creation and evolution of life in the universe to perceive the events. The only other source of information would have to be a credible source. As for subjecting such things to the scientific method, it is beyond the scope of science to subject what preceded life or to confine millions of years of events to experimental conditions. As for observing the process of evolution of life that the scientific community claims to have occurred, one must have lived several million years ago and had several thousand years to observe such events to see what really happened. Because no human being can make such a claim, the only other source of such information regarding the origin of man and life is from a credible source. The question that comes is, how do the scientists reach their conclusion that life came about through evolution? The answer is that they do not reach a definite conclusion because they cannot. Such events that they claim to have occurred are beyond the senses as well as beyond the process of scientific experimentation, and they have no credible source of information that they can claim to exist, other than what they perceive. Because they cannot perceive what they claim to have occurred, they are forced to make an assumption based on their observation of the similarities that they observe, such as the biochemical, anatomical and molecular similarities, that life evolved from one another through gradual evolution caused by chance mutations in the genomes of living things and through the pressures of natural selection. Thus, the theory of evolution cannot be taken as a basis for thought or ideas because it is an assumption of an event that happened in the past based upon direct observations. There is no way to prove an assumption conclusively, it is just speculation. Also, if the assumption is incorrect, then everything based upon that assumption is invalid. Speculation and forging guesses on the basis of events that may have happened is an incorrect way to build any belief or thought or idea. It must be built upon definite, conclusive facts arrived at through the rational method based on observations of things within the realm of perception, and not based on speculation on things beyond the perception of the human mind and senses. As was discussed before, the scientific method has its limits. It is confined to those things that are tangible and can be subjected to experimental conditions, from which certain conclusions and realities are arrived at. By extending this notion to include events that cannot be subjected to experimental conditions, such as the origins of life, man and the universe, the scientists not only break their own rules, but they are unscientific as possible when they are forced to resort to speculation and making assumptions. As a result, the scientific community, while claiming to have a reputation of civility against the medieval creationists, has become a premier in the art of stupidity when it consigns itself to explain how the universe started with a big bang or how life originated and evolved into its many variant forms based on a mysterious force called Mother Nature. The justification that evolution's proponents use to push their idea is the existence of different traits and attributes within similar organisms that result from genetic mutations and confer certain adaptations. First, they confuse between evolution and adaptation and try to use the existence of one to assume the existence of the other, making another assumption that they both describe the same process, whereas they are different. Evolution is a process by which one life form with unique attributes would change into a totally different life form with its own unique attributes, such as a monkey changing into a human being or a dolphin changing into a snake. Adaptation is a process that occurs within a species by which one individual develops certain characteristics to help it adapt to changes in the environment, but the organism still maintains its unique attributes characteristic of its original species. Adaptation is a process that occurs all the time. For example, human beings who live in certain parts in Africa which receive more sunlight and radiation have darker skin, whereas human beings who live at high elevation have other adaptations, such as increased lung capacity and larger chests. Yet they are still human beings. Also, when the scientists study the fruit fly Drosophila, or strains of yeast in mice, and they confer different traits through genetic mutation or recombinant technology, they are conferring adaptations, yet the Drosophila remain as Drosophila, the yeast remains yeast, and the mice remain mice. Such observations of these different characteristics and adaptations cannot be used to assume that the process of evolution in which a mouse would change into a dog or a cat would change into a fox occurs because they are totally different. What Darwin observed was different adaptations of the same bird, and based upon his observation of the process of adaptation he assumed that the diversity of life resulted from a different process which he referred to as evolution through random mutations and natural selection. The question that comes is, could all the great diversity of life emerge from adaptation alone? Such a process is unlimited in the amount of diversity it can create. Human beings could take literally thousands of different adaptations and characteristics, and they would all be considered human beings. Second, they assume that mutations in the gene would result in transforming the life form into a completely different organism. The scientists, through recombinant technology and other techniques, have been able to literally delete entire genes and add completely new genes from one life form to another, a process known as transgenics, or the science of transferring genes from one organism to another. For instance, genes from human beings have been introduced into bacteria and mice. This goes far above and beyond the simple point mutations and changes that the scientists claim to have happened throughout the course of time by chance which resulted in a complete overhaul of one organism into another, yet still the mice stay mice, and the bacteria stay as bacteria, even with large segments of their genomes cut out and replaced with human equivalents. Thus, the justification that evolution's proponents use to justify their stance has no basis. Those who are pushing for evolution might wish to consider what basis they are standing on before they attempt to push for any solution to humanity's problems. Evolution is based on the concept of dialectics, which states that the origin of man, life, and the universe was based on the continuous change and evolution of material, and this basis was the foundation of an ideology that was implemented by a state. The ideology was communism and its patron state was the Soviet Union. And it is well known that such an ideology was totally devoid of any human quality and failed completely in its ability to deal with human problems, in its ability to address the human being, and in its ability to productively settle the core problem of humanity in a manner agreeing with the rational evidence and with the human nature. Because the communist ideology was based on materialism, they claimed that everything could be explained scientifically, including the origins of man, life and the universe, and including human problems and human needs. As a result of trying to implement such an idea, Soviet communism took the meaning of pain, suffering, and oppression to new levels never witnessed before in human history. There are many things that cannot be subjected to science and explained on the basis of material alone. As a result, communism was alien to the human being and the human needs, and it was devoid of any solution for human problems or answers to the questions of human existence. Such a failure shows that the doctrine of dialectic materialism is incorrect and invalid, and anything based upon this doctrine, including evolution, is also incorrect. Thus, for those who champion evolution as a solution to humanity's questions or pride themselves into thinking that science can be used as an ideology or as a solution to human problems and issues, they should first look to their example in the former Soviet Union and to the miserable track record of communism and take a lesson before they give one. The Islamic verdict on evolution. Because of the influence of the Western educational curriculum, many Muslims have become enchanted with the theory of evolution even though it diametrically opposes Islam. In their vain attempts to reconcile between the two, many Muslims are unable to find an answer to the questions that many proponents of evolution commonly raise. Eventually, the end result is despair and resignation to the idea that the theory of evolution is a reality. For example, the evolutionists would continue to point out the immense diversity of life, claiming that their idea explains the richness of living organisms on the earth. Such persons would raise questions such as, how did all these different animals, plants, and other organisms come about, or where did all the anatomical, physiological, and biochemical similarities that are universal among all life forms come from? Or how is it that all the life forms, as different and distinct as they are subject to the same laws, constants, and processes? Without trying to dig deep into details, the Islamic answer is very simple and straightforward. They all came from the same Creator. Allah, SWT, mentions in many ayahs that He created things in great diversity. With it He causes to grow for you the crops, the olives, the date palms, the grapes, and every kind of fruit. Verily, in this is indeed an evident proof and a manifest sign for people who give thought. TMQ 1611. And whatsoever He has created for you on this earth of varying colors, and qualities from vegetation and fruits, etc. botanical life, and from animal, zoological life. Verily, in this is a sign for people who remember. TMQ 1613. Allah has created every moving, living, creature from water. Of them are some that creep on their legs, some that walk on 2 legs, and some that walk on 4. Allah creates what He wills. Verily, Allah is able to do all things. TMQ 2445. See you not that Allah sends down water, rain, from the sky, and we produce therewith fruits of varying colors, and among the mountains are streaks white and red, of varying colors and, others, very black. And of men and ad-dawab, moving, living creatures, beasts, etc., and cattle, in like manner of various colors. TMQ 3527-28. Because Allah, SWT, created the universe, then the entire universe and everything within it submit to Allah's laws. The fact that all the living organisms of the earth share a wide spectrum of physical and chemical similarities only stands as further proof of the fact that they all emanated from the same source. This fact should push the intellectual person towards this realization that all things had their origin from Allah, SWT, and the result of sharing the same origin is the many similarities that exist among both the living and the non-living world. Evolution and Western culture. Many people think that the theory of evolution stems purely from science. Thus, the assumption that is made is that any attack on the idea of evolution is a direct assault upon science and the scientific culture itself. Based upon this assumption, Islam would be an anti-scientific way of life because the Islamic viewpoint is diametrically opposed to the evolutionist viewpoint. The assumption that the theory of evolution and science embody the same entity is false. Science is a tool by which human beings understand the laws and phenomenon that the Creator has made to organize and govern the universe with, while evolution is an idea that is based upon a specific point of view of life. In fact, the theory of evolution is an abnormality which attempts to push science beyond its boundaries into the realm of the ideology, which is something that is beyond the scope of science. The theory of evolution, as well as the idea of scientific ideology which states that science can be used as a basis of thought and a foundation of ideology, came from the communist ideology and is used by the West in order to push its capitalist ideology and culture into the minds of the people. Throughout the ages, science has been, and still remains, a respected institution, but the West has done a great injustice to science by using it to propagate its ideas and concepts. The West has failed in all aspects to provide solutions to the ever-increasing problems that exist within its societies. Crime, poverty, behavioral abominations such as homosexuality, child molestation, and oppression, as well as the deteriorating moral fabric and decaying family structure, are just a few of the long list of problems that characterize the dismal failure of Western capitalism and its secular foundation in providing any solution. To conceal this fact from the people that the cause of all of these problems stems from the failure of the ideology and its incorrect foundation, to conceal this reality for fear that the people may begin to question the very foundation of the West and look for an alternative, the West uses the scientific institution to cover its mess. For example, through the concept of fatalism, the West is claiming that human problems such as homosexuality and criminal behavior are predetermined by the genes and, therefore, are fated to be a scientific reality of human beings as well as human societies. Because science is a respected institution, then the people are fooled into adopting this concept as a scientific fact that cannot be disputed or questioned, and that the problems that have resulted from the capitalist ideology and the incorrect thoughts and ideas are not a result of the incorrectness of Western capitalism but a fact of life that must be accepted. As a result, the Western culture and ideology is free from questioning, and the motivation to look for an alternative is silenced. Similarly, the West uses science through the theory of evolution. Because the question of what is before this life is fundamental to the existence of humanity, then human beings will continue to ask this question, and ultimately this question will evolve into the public opinion and in the affairs of life. Because the West is based upon the concept of secularism, which attempts to detach the question of what is before and after the life from the worldly affairs, then the West would use any means necessary to remove this question as far away from the public opinion in order to safeguard its ideology. Thus, whenever questions such as, what was before all of this? Or who created the universe? Or where did we all come from? Are raised, the theory of evolution comes with a glamorous explanation that it all happened by chance or by a probability occurrence. Such tactics by which the ruling establishment would protect itself by using a respected institution to propagate its ideas and culture is not unique to Western capitalism. During the Middle Ages, the Church was very much respected by the people, and the clergy used the Church to propagate its ideas and justify its policies, which were merely the opinions of the clergy and had nothing to do with the revelation. Thus, when oppression, poverty, disease, backwardness, and stagnation were characteristic of life in the Middle Ages and the people would attempt to search for the cause of this misery, the papacy promoted the concept of fatalism by using the Church as a front to propagate the concept that everything was fated by God's will, in the same manner that the West today uses the scientific institution to promote the same concept that the oppression and misery caused by the dominance of capitalism are fated by the genetic code and are scientific facts that must be accepted, even though such problems are unique to the failure of capitalism and have nothing to do with science. Even today, the rulers and regimes in the Muslim world use Islam, which is more respected among the Muslims than anything else, in order to justify their policies and claim that their actions are Islamic, although their policies have nothing to do with Islam. Such a method ultimately results in the people rebelling against the institution itself that they once respected. During the Middle Ages, the Church was respected in the eyes of the people. When the clergy used the Church to impose its own point of view, the people eventually rejected the Church, and this resentment escalated to a bitter intellectual revolt against religion altogether, which resulted in the birth of secularism and subsequent removal of the Church from the lives of the people. In the Muslim world, the regimes and rulers who use Islam to justify their existence and their policies have resulted in a feeling of resentment among Muslims towards Islam as a political solution to their problems. Similarly, the scientific institution is respected by all human beings, but the West's attempt to use science to impose its culture and point of view is resulting in many people rejecting science and scientific culture as something evil and alien to human beings. There is a feeling among many people in the West that scientific advancement will change their lives for the worst and is interfering with their lives. As a result, the West has done a great injustice to science, and the theory of evolution has succeeded only in alienating the people from the scientific culture. Islam, on the other hand, provides a comprehensive doctrine to the fundamental questions of existence which frees the human mind to pursue science. Islam is the correct doctrine which agrees fully with the rationally deduced reality that everything in the universe, including the universe itself, has a beginning in its creation by Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it depends upon the Creator for its sustenance. In addition, Islam establishes through decisive facts that the Quran is the speech of Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is a conclusive proof that Muhammad, is the messenger of Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Islam is the correct creed, then the system which emanates from this creed is correct, and its implementation will organize humanity at all levels and will lead to a progressive society based upon justice. Thus, Islam does not need to hide behind an institution to prove its correctness because Islam is based upon the conclusive facts arrived at through the rational method, and anyone who observes the reality will come to the intellectual realization that the Islamic Aqidah is correct. In addition, Islam does not need to be glamorized by media hype and sensationalism to make it more attractive to the people because the Islamic system is established upon the correct foundation of belief, which will result in justice and progress in all facets of life as result of its implementation. It was under the Islamic system that the scientific culture reached its zenith, and many of the discoveries that exist today can be attributed to the achievements of those who lived under Islamic rule. Many sciences under Islam were purified from superstitious beliefs and false concepts. For example, astrology and astronomy were very well known to the Arabs before Islam. Upon the arrival of Islam, astronomy was purified from such corrupt ideas as astrology and made into a pure science. No other ideology has done so much for science that Islam, and it is often stated that Islam made the greatest contribution to science by putting science in its rightful place. By recognizing that science has its limitations, Islam maintains the distinction between the ideology as a basis for providing answers and solutions to human problems and science as a tool that is used to observe the physical universe. In addition, Islam protects science from mixing with the ideology, as the capitalists and the communists have done, and maintains the scientific culture as a pure science. Reconciling secularism and evolution. The West has used the theory of evolution in order to propagate its point of view of life. However, the theory of evolution has as its origins the communist doctrine of dialectics, which denies the existence of the Creator. Because secularism does not deny the existence of the Creator, then the theory of evolution is a thought alien to the secular doctrine, which forces the West to reconcile evolution and its secular doctrine. To do this, they rely on the ticking clock theory, which states that the Creator created the universe and life and left them to evolve without any intervention. In the same manner that a clockmaker manufactures a clock and leaves it to tick on its own, the proponents of evolution, in order to avoid the label of being communists, claim that the Creator set the clock for the universe to run and evolve, and left the universe to evolve and run on its own like the ticking clock runs on its own without the clockmaker. Such an argument is pure speculation because those people who claim such an idea have no way of proving the Creator's plans and the way He designed the universe. They would either have to claim that they are messengers of God, that the Creator communicated with them and conveyed that information to them, or they would have to prove that the source of this information comes from the Creator. Because they have no proof for either, they must resign themselves to such stupid, idiotic theories that compares the origins of the universe and life to a ticking clock which no one can prove. Conclusion. The theory of evolution is incorrect because it is established upon an incorrect basis of scientific ideology, which attempts to use the scientific method as a basis of building belief and a foundation for the ideology. Because science cannot answer such questions as what is before or after life, or what is the origin of man, life and the universe, attempting to use the scientific method for something that science cannot be used for, such as establishing belief, results in speculation and assumption from which definite facts cannot be reached. One mistake that the Muslims make is trying to disprove the theory of evolution from a scientific perspective. Science cannot be used to either prove or disprove any thought or belief about the origins of man, life, and the universe because the origins of man, life and the universe is beyond the scope of the scientific method. The scientific method can only be used to prove or disprove facts relating to tangible things that can be subjected to the scientific process of experimentation. Neither the origin of man, life, and the universe, nor the question of what is before or after life, can be subjected to experimental conditions and validated or falsified using the scientific method. One question that comes: if evolution is incorrect in its foundation, then why has it become so institutionalized? The answer is the same answer to the question of why Islam, which is correct and has a legacy of 13 centuries of unparalleled justice and progress under the dominance of Islam, is perceived in such a negative light. It is also the same answer to the question of why concepts like democracy, freedom, and international law, even though they contradict reality and do not exist, are cherished by the people as sacred. Evolution has a system behind it, as does democracy, freedom, and all of Western ideology and culture, whereas Islam does not have a system to stand behind it. Because of the support of the Western establishment, which now controls the entire world, the theory of evolution is protected and propagated to the world, but the pervasiveness of evolution does not give it any credibility or validity, in the same manner that the dominance of capitalism does not change the fact that capitalism is an incorrect ideology. California Publications.